Okay, let's get this shit over with. I'm doing like a different format. The title apparently being by the way, I did a script for this one, so this is like a different format than usual. But let's go. Uh it says why I stopped overclocking conversations. I've been thinking about conversations as systems lately. Which is probably already the first problem. Most normal people do not look at the conversation thing. What is the input output ratio here? How much bandwidth is available? Is the packet loss? Are acknowledgements being returned? Is this process still returning or just sending data in a socket that was quietly closed 20 minutes ago? Normal people would probably just talk, but apparently I'm incapable of leaving any human interaction in its natural state. I need to inspect it. I need to understand it. I need to take part in a machine while it is still running and then act surprised when the machine stops working. And I think this is especially dangerous online because online communications give you a false sense of precision. Everything is visible. You can see when something was sent. You can sometimes see whether someone is online. You can see whether a message was read. You can see how long an answer is. You can see who initiated the conversation. So you can scroll backwards and reconstruct the entire interaction like some kind of low-budget digital forensic investigation. But having more data does not necessarily mean that you understand what is happening. Sometimes it just means that you have more material to overthink. And I'm extremely talented at converting harmless information into unnecessary psychological infrastructure. Someone sends one short reply, my brain creates a quarterly report. Someone takes a few hours to answer, my brain establishes a committee. Someone changes their tone slightly, and therefore, what the fuck? My brain launches a full incident response procedure. So, severity level unknown. Potential emotional outage detected. Please contact the administrator. The administrator is also the problem. And this is where I start to think about the idea of conversational investment. Because people always say things like, just be yourself, show interest, put effort into people. Communication is important. All of that sounds reasonable. But there is a point where effort stops being effort and starts becoming pressure. Not necessarily because you intended pressure, not necessarily because you said anything openly demanding. Sometimes the sheer amount of attention becomes its own message. You send 5 thoughts, the other person sends 1 sentence. You send 3 links, 2 jokes, a question, a clarification of the joke, and then a second clarification, explaining that the first clarification was not supposed to sound defensive. They sent lol. And now you have created an entire media ecosystem around the word lol. You start analyzing the punctuation. Was it lowercase because they are relaxed, or is it because they do not care? Would uppercase LOL indicate greater emotional engagement? Does LMAO rank above LOL? What about the skull emoji? Is the skull emoji genuine laughter, or is it socially acceptable termination signal? At some point, the conversation is no longer a conversation, it becomes an unpaid research project. And the absurd thing about the more uncertain I become, the more information I produce, which is exactly backwards. Uncertainty should probably make you pause. My version of uncertainty produces documentation. I explain more, I ask more questions, I try to remove ambiguity. But ambiguity is not always a technical fault. Sometimes ambiguity is the answer. Sometimes a person is slightly interested. Sometimes they're interested right now, but not tomorrow. Sometimes they enjoy one type of interaction, but not another. Sometimes they like attention, but do not want responsibility for the expectations created by the attention. Sometimes they are simply bored. Sometimes they're busy. Sometimes they're genuine like you, but still do not want to communicate at intensity that you prefer. And sometimes they do not know what they want either. The last part is important. We often assume that inconsistent behavior must be calculated, that there must be a strategy, that mixed signals or somewhat advanced form of manipulation. But human beings are not stable software releases. People are unfinished development builds or running directly in production. There is no quality assurance, there is no changelog. Features disappear overnight. Yesterday, rapid communications was apparently important. Today, expecting a reply is controlling. Yesterday you were too distant, today you're too invested. Yesterday silence was disrespectful, today asking about silence is pressure. And naturally, when the rules change, you want to point out the rules change. You want to open the locks, you want to say, wait a minute, according to previous interaction, this exact behavior was requested. I adjusted my behavior based on the feedback. Now the adjusted behavior is also considered incorrect. Please explain the expected configuration. But there's no help desk, there's no service level agreement, there's no mutually signed document defining acceptable response times. There's only another person, probably tired, probably distracted, possibly confused, and maybe interpreting the entire situation differently. That does not mean you imagine the contradiction. It just means providing the contradiction will probably not improve anything. This is one of the hardest lessons for me. Being correct about the sequence of events does not mean continuing the argument is useful. You can have evidence, you can have timestamps, you can have screenshots, you can have perfectly symmetrical diagrams explaining why the other person applied two different standards. And you can still lose the interaction completely because communication is not a courtroom. Most people are not interested in discovering the objectivity, correct interpretation of a conversation. They're interested in how the conversation currently feels. And feelings have terrible version control. You cannot roll them back to yesterday's build. You cannot say 2 days ago, you appeared to enjoy this dynamic, therefore the current emotional response is invalid. That is logically understandable and socially useless. This does not mean that every emotional reaction is fair. It doesn't mean that a contradiction expectation should be accepted forever. It does not mean one person can demand attention and punish the other person for wanting reciprocity. Reciprocity. It just means that when the dynamic becomes inconsistent, the best response is often not deeper analysis. The best response may simply be reduced investment, not punishment, not revenge, not some drastic strategy where you pretend to be indifferent, just calibration. The problem is that calibration sounds boring. The internet prefers absolute rules. Never doubt texts. Always wait exactly 3 hours. Do not show interest, show maximum interest. Be mysterious, be emotional, available, be confident, be vulnerable, be dominant, be respectful, act busy. Communicate clearly. Apparently, you need to become 17 contradictory personalities simultaneously. Then people wonder why online interaction feels artificial. Everybody's running scripts. Everyone is trying to avoid appearing too interested. Everyone is measuring response times. Everybody is pretending not to notice that everybody else is pretending. So I came up with my own intentional stupid rules. The 1% rule. Put 1% of your power into every conversation. Do not invest, do not care. So only 1 syllable every 3 business days. Protect all the emotional sources behind the industrial firewall. Is this healthy? Probably not. But would it prevent overinvestment? Absolutely. It would prevent friendship, intimacy, humor, connection, possibly a language itself. You cannot build anything with permanent emotional power. Saving mode enabled. If everybody puts it 1%, the conversation becomes, hey, how are you? Good. And then both participants die of old age before the next message arrives. So the 1% rule is not really the answer, but the emotion behind makes it sound exhaustion comes repeatedly. Supplying 90% of the momentum is the feeling of carrying into action, being blamed by cause interaction. Is this frustration being sold to initiative? Showing and then discovering the initiatives was only welcome when it required nothing in return. This is the real issue. No effort is symmetry. An ecosystem can function temporarily in 1% may have more energy, 1% may be busy. 1% may naturally write more. One person may prefer voice communication while the other prefers text. Perfect equality is impossible and probably undesirable, but over time there needs to be some reciprocal, no identical behavior. Movement will help us as something whether being prompted. The initial occasionally remember something. They make space, they even pushing forward. That is important because this is with crazy illusion as plugging device and battery was, and you think, oh, it was persistent, blah, blah, blah. Holy shit, this is boring, man. Holy fucking shit, I never thought this would be this fucking boring.